Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl. And while there was no Monday release for an article on Warhammer The Old World, there is one for the 26th of December. So yes, here we are after Christmas, and we now have a Warhammer The Old World article on Warhammer Community. And I was expecting it to be something light, but I can tell you now there's quite a lot to look at in this article. So without further ado, let's take a look. So here we are on Warhammer Community, and we've got Warhammer The Old World, the Tomb Kings of Khemri revealed. Well, I can tell you now, there's more than that to look at. So, we get past Fun Fact for Boxing Day, and then we've got it's the Tomb Kings of Khemri and a bunch of guys in some metal trousers. So we've got a now look at what was leaked before, which was the Tomb Kings and Bretonnia core boxes. Very cool. We now know what they're going to look like. So, what does it say? Before we get into that, a nice artwork. I have to say, I really like the artwork on these boxes. Very old school Warhammer fantasy artwork as opposed to just painted miniatures on the front. So I actually really like this, and I hope we see more of this on the return for the boxes. It's a cosmetic thing, but actually it looks really good. So, what is said? So there's no single launch box for Warhammer The Old World. Okay, so we're not going to get like your normal launch box with two armored, different factions in and all that sort of stuff. Instead, there are two separate and massive core army boxes. So each one contains a full 1,250 point army with dozens of all plastic miniatures each. On top of that, you get a complete 352 page hardback Warhammer The Old World rulebook, a 4-page reference sheet, 20 d6 dice, 1 6-sided scatter dice, and 3 weapon templates, 2 classic red plastic measuring sticks, oh my god, they're back, and some transfer sheets. Okay, right, well, we can see this is the Tomb Kings of Khemri here. So we got some skeleton warriors in there. We got a Tomb King, which means we've probably got a leash high priest here on the bone dragon. Skeleton horsemen, skeleton horse archers, 3 chariots, and some archers at the back. So the leash priests have exhumed a horde of 93 Tomb Kings miniatures, including the magnificent new leash priest on Necrolith bone dragon, which can additionally build a Tomb King on foot, which you can see here, or be built instead as a Tomb King on bone dragon. The rest is made up of enough classic kits, so everything in here is a classic kit apart from the bone dragon, which is a bit of a shame because the Tomb King's core skeletons, they're not necessarily the best, but enough classic kits to create an army fit for Cetra himself. So we've got 40 skeleton warriors, 32 skeleton archers. That's kind of a weird number, I have to say. 16 skeleton horsemen. I mean, this goes back to the old classic boxes where you had 8 in a box or 16 in a box. Kind of odd. Shame they haven't really changed that. Have to say I prefer it if it was 40, 30, 20, that sort of thing. But no, we've kind of got some odd numbers for units here. 32 is kind of an odd number because it feels like it's too much for a single unit, but it's not enough for 2 full units. Whereas 40 skeletons, 2 blocks of 20 makes more sense. 16 skeleton horsemen, 2 units of 8, okay, but actually I'd probably like a 5 frontage, which means I'd rather have 5 or 10. 3 chariots, though, okay. But we'll probably take a bit of a deeper dive into these army boxes in a separate video, so I don't want to spend too much time on it now. Kingdom of Bretonnia edition. Okay, so what we've got in here, we can see is a Pegasus. We've got men-at-arms. Looks like Knights of the Realm. We've got some archers and some Pegasus Knights. Okay, raise your banners to the lady with the Kingdom of Bretonnia box, which contains 76 miniatures. There's less miniatures than the skeletons, but still a 1,250 point army, apparently. The resplendent new lord on Royal Pegasus can be built as a duke or a baron, backed up by a lance formation of 12 Bretonnian Knights of the Realm, 36 Bretonnian men-at-arms, 24 peasant bowmen with 2 defense stakes, 3 Pegasus Knights, and a Kingdom of Bretonia transfer sheet. So again, 36 and 24 and 12, we've got these odd numbered units, which don't make for your nice 5, 10 frontages, for example. Not to say you can't use them. You can see here you've got 3 ranks with 6. That's an 18-man unit. So you can use it in that way, but it's just kind of, you're back to these odd numbers where 36 again feels too much for a single unit, not enough for 2 units. Same with the peasant bowman. So you kind of feel like you kind of either got models left over or not enough, which is kind of interesting. They don't feel like fully fleshed out units. The only good thing here, obviously, with the Bretonian one, is you do have a unit which I would consider in the special category. If you look at the Tomb King's box, they're all core, or what I think will be core, let's put it like that. But the Bretonians here, looks like, we've got the Pegasus here, which is in the special. So, as I said, we're going to dive deeper into each of those boxes on a separate video. Right, so now we've got the Warhammer The Old World rulebook. Oh, in terms of what I think, in terms of a cost for this, difficult to say right now. I'm thinking might well be in the £150 region. Though, given these are existing plastic miniatures, maybe they'll be £120, but you do have a big rule book in there, plus all the dice and templates and everything else. So, it's certainly in my mind, from a UK pricing perspective, I'm thinking around £120 to £150, which would put it sort of consistent with what you might find in a Horus Heresy starter box, for example. Right, so let's look at the rule book. We know it's 352 pages. Okay, typical big rule book for Games Workshop, not really my flavour. You get 70 pages of background on the world of Legend plus core and advanced rules for the game, an explanation of the winds of magic, and rules for casting spells, gallery of armies painted by the Heavy Metal Studio, rules for building armies, setting up battlefields, and also released as a digital EPUB version. The reason why I'm not sold personally on these big books, and they're not my flavour, is I really wish they would just do a small rule book that was a cheap to buy rule book so you could play the game. If I'm invested then in the game, I'm going to want to know more about the lore, and I want to see galleries of painted models and everything else. It's going to make these books expensive, and I don't like an expensive sort of initial rule book. You want to get people playing the game and into the game, not have them buy some ginormous tome, probably a fairly sizable price just to start looking at the rules and playing the game. But there you go, not unexpected, I have to say. And if we go and take a look at the Warhammer shop, here's Horus Heresy. Now, I equate Warhammer The Old World to sort of Horus Heresy. It's in that vein, right? So if we look at the Horus Heresy, here we are, Age of Darkness rulebook. Looks to be a similar size book, hardback, similar thickness there, £42.50. My expectation is this rule book on its own will also be £42.50. Right, so Forces of Fantasy and Ravening Hordes. Rules for all 9 factions in the game will be available at launch in one of 2 tomes covering the Forces of Good and Forces of Evil. Forces of Fantasy and Ravening Hordes, respectively. Ravening Hordes, a bit of a throwback to the past. Okay. So, quite weighty tomes again. We've got Forces of Fantasy, a 192-page book, available in hardback and EPUB formats. I like the fact they've now gone back to allowing for these EPUB formats. That's nice. So you've got 5 factions in the good book, essentially, which is the Dwarven Mountain Holds, the Empire of Man, Kingdom of Bretonia, Wood Elves, and High Elves. No surprises there. So each army gets an introduction, a gallery of miniatures, a grand army composition list, a complete set of unit profiles, special rules, magic items, and unique spells. Okay. And then in Ravening Hordes, you get your evil factions, 160-page hardback book, slightly less pages because less faction. And you've got Orcs and Goblins, Warriors of Chaos, Beasts and Brayheads, and Tomb Kings of Khemri. I know a lot of people will say Tomb Kings are not an evil faction. I also don't consider them essentially an evil faction. I consider them more of a neutral faction. But at the end of the day, you've got to split these guys somehow, and therefore they're undead. Put them in the evil book. And leave it at that. I don't have any issue with that. I know some people kind of like saying, well, they're not evil, but, just take it for what it is. They're in a book and they're not in the force of good, because otherwise you'd have like a one massive force of good book and you need to balance it out somehow. So no issue with that. That's fine. But again, if we think about these books here, these books remind me of the Legion, Liber Astartes and the Liber Hereticus. These are the sort of the indexes, if you like, for Horus Heresy factions. This is the if you want to put it, the non-chaos, the loyalist Space Marines. This is the heresy Space Marines. But again, you're at £42.50 for this big hardback tome, and I think we could be in for a similar cost here. So if you think about just the rules to play the game, let's assume that you don't buy a starter box. So if you're like myself, I have no intention of buying these starter boxes. I have all the models in greater numbers even than the starter box for both Bretonnia and the Tomb Kings. Therefore, given there's very little new in it, I'd rather just buy the Bone Dragon on its own or the Duke on Pegasus on its own. I don't need any more Pegasus Knights or Archers or anything like that. So just if I'm buying the main rule book, and then even if I'm just buying one of these books, I'm probably looking at somewhere around £80 to £85 for the rules. If you're into both, if you're into getting all the books, which is the main rule book, and both of these because you've got multiple armies, so like myself, I own Warriors of Chaos, I have a Tomb Kings of Khemri army, and I have I don't have any dwarves, but I do have Empire, Bretonnia, Wood Elf, and High Elf armies as well, all from Warhammer Fantasy. So I do want both books, and so you're into £120 to £130 at that point to get the rules, all the rules on day one, and that doesn't include any miniatures at all, dice, measuring sticks, templates. You need to already have that from somewhere or have a source to get it from, or you're into buying the box set. Now, if we said the box set somewhere between 120, 150, you then have these two books on top of that. That would be another £80. So if you're going in for a starter box, you're probably looking at £200 for a single army starter box, plus a couple or both of these books. Right, okay. So you'll need the main Warhammer The Old World rulebook to use either of these. So you have to have the main book here, or at least one of these to play one faction that you've picked. So let's say you've picked Bretonnia, that's what you need. Right. In addition to these hefty hardback books, there are arcane journals. So these are softback. That keeps the price down for each faction. They expand it all out with history, heraldry, maps, so this is all lore stuff. So that you don't need to play the game. Special characters. So now if you want to use named characters, you'd need to buy this book, including a certain undead emperor. So that's I'm 99% certain that will be Cetra. So I know we're in a different time zone, but he's around during this time as well. He's obviously long living. So now you're starting to get into rules, right? Magic items. So these are going to be faction-specific magic items. Spells. So that had unique spells up here for a faction, but now it says you're going to get spells in an arcane journal as well. A historical scenario, and then thematic armies of infamy, which let you select armies of very different composition. So you actually need a third book. Now, a lot of people will say, no, you don't. If you want to play Bretonnia, all you need is the rulebook and the Forces of Fantasy. Absolutely correct. And if you're playing casually, that's absolutely correct. But if we look at Games Workshop in the past and you want to play competitively, you need access to all of the rules, which includes special characters, magic items, spells, thematic armies of infamy, right? Because you need to make... There's no doubt, and we've seen this happen in many times in the past, where you've got these rules to give factions a flavour in a separate campaign book or something. It's happened in 40k. Suddenly, that becomes a meta thing. That becomes the most competitive thing. So if you want to be competitive and have access to all the rules, which you would need to be competitive, you will have to buy the main rule book, a Forces of Fantasy book, and the Kingdom of Bretonnia Arcane Journal to have all the rules for Bretonnia. And this is going to obviously happen for every single faction in the game. Now, looking at these books, they're probably, softback. They don't look particularly huge, but they're probably in the £20 to £25 region. So just to play Bretonnia at what I would say and have a competitive position, which is access to those rules, you're into £80 to £85 of these books plus another 20. There's £100 of rule books at that point. And then you will then if you have any other factions, so like myself, I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 from here, another 2 from here. So that's 6 at £20 to £25 on top of the £120 or so you've spent on these books. Now, having army books isn't unusual. Having indexes at the beginning of a release, we've seen that recently, and we've seen that a couple of times with Warhammer 40k. So that's not a surprise. What is interesting is it doesn't appear that this is a complete army book, because unless I'm mistaken, I can't see anything that says that the unit profiles and the Grand Army composition list or any of this stuff in the index is in the army book. All right, so you will need both. You can't just go down the main rule book and an army book, right? Which is what you can do if you're playing Age of Sigmar right now. You've got the Age of Sigmar rule book and the army book. If you're playing 40k, you've got the 40k main rule book and you've got the army book. Now, like I say, they are re-releasing a game here. They do need to have these indexes. I would have kind of expected that an army book type thing, and that's why they're not calling it an army book. They are calling it an arcane journal. You'd kind of expect everything to be in that, and it's clearly not. And now, if you are playing a game, you're going to have to refer to your unit profiles for your basic army in here. But if you are playing with armies of infamy, you're using certain magic items or using a special character, you will have to carry and delve into a separate rule book. Less than ideal. It is what it is. It's not a huge surprise. I don't think anyone should be surprised about that. I think the only thing that I am a little surprised is the army book isn't a complete overall army book. It's kind of an add-on. And it's like I say, just to be clear, it is not mandatory to have your arcane journal to play Bretonnia. If you want to play competitively, however, with Bretonnia, you want to be able to see and have access to all the rules, which will include special characters, magic items, spells, and other thematic armies of infamy. Okay, but even if thematic armies of infamy weren't allowed, for example, for whatever reason, I can't imagine they wouldn't be, because it's basically just a different formation. The magic items should be, the spells should be, the special characters should be. We see that in other tournaments and things like that. So, to be clear there, that your average casual player doesn't need it, but I think most people are going to want it, even if it's not just for the armies of infamy, letting you build your army a different way. If it's not for the special characters, who wants Tomb Kings, and doesn't want to at least have rules for Cetra and stuff like that? It's kind of fun, thematic, even if you're playing casually, right? So, kind of interesting, Right, for instance, Arcane Journal Kingdoms of Bretonnia has rules for Bretonnian Exiles and Errantry Crusades. Tomb Kings of Khemri, and we saw about those last time, has Nehekar Royal Host and Mortuary Cult. Okay, so it'll be interesting what that's about. It is important to know that you don't require an Arcane Journal to play your chosen faction, right? You don't need it. Okay? You kind of do if you want to be competitive. All the units and army rules are contained within the Ravening Horde. So yeah, it does say that that's where the unit and army rules are. But they do provide a trove of extra options and extra depth for discerning generals. Those extra options and extra depth in a competitive standpoint can be mandatory if they are over-optimized and overpowered. So keep that in mind. The Arcane Journals for the Kingdom of Bretonnia and Kingdom of Khemri will arrive at launch alongside the army releases with those for other factions following in the future. Okay, so yeah, as we said, you're into probably £40 plus for the main rulebook, £40 plus for each one of these army list books, these index style books, and then you're probably into £20 to £25. That's an absolute guess right now. I have no idea on prices. I'm guessing based upon what we already see on the Horus Heresy end. There are none of these paperback things, so I'm kind of going on old softback army book sort of style pricing, looking at the size of them and everything else. If these are significantly smaller, as in they are in A5 instead of A4 format, then they could be cheaper again. They could be cheaper again. But if these are A4, then I'm putting them in around the £20 to £25 mark. Right, now what else have we got? We've got Tomb Kings of Khemri miniatures. So not wanting to be outdone by the self-important and short-lived mortals of Bretonnia, the venal and power-hungry royalty of Khemri have a handful of other new miniatures up their sandy sleeves. So we've got a special character here, Nekaf, the emissary of Cetra. Okay, so this is a special character. So this dude is going to be in an arcane journal, right? There will be no rules for him in the index because he is a special character. So Cetra the Imperishable has accumulated a truly prodigious number of epithets and achievements over the long centuries of his own life, and this seemingly endless list of titles and victories is recounted in full by his loyal servant, Nekaf, before each battle. Luckily, animated skeletons are very patient. Armed with the enchanted flail of conquered kings, and we see that here, Nekaf, emissary of Cetra, pulverizes those who refuse to kneel before his mortal liege. Okay, so Nekaf, he was in a previous Tomb Kings book, but didn't have a model, if I remember correctly. I can't remember 100%. I'm pretty sure he did. He didn't. What do I think about the miniature here? As the emissary of Cetra, I mean, I actually think it looks quite good. You've got your flail of skulls here. He's on the obligatory rock just to give him a bit of extra height. And that shouldn't matter too much given he'll be in some kind of unit. You've got your obligatory scarabs on it to make it Tomb Kings. I actually quite like the detailing on him here. I think that looks actually quite nice personally. So no real issue here. The only thing I think, because he's going to be joining a unit and you're putting him, like, this is very sort of Age of Sigmar-y for me with this base, because they tend to be out on their own, they're skirmished. When you've got a single miniature who is on a rock this high, in a rank and file, it's going to look a bit odd. Because he's going to be like stood on a rock in the middle of a unit. It's going to make him ridiculously tall in that unit and stick out. It's going to make it look kind of odd, particularly if you've got other characters. Imagine if you had a Tomb King who's on foot on the ground. The Tomb King's only going to come up to here. So that's the only thing for me, is when you start going down the I'm on a massive rock base and you're putting them in rank and file units, they kind of look odd. Because they stick out. He's going to stick out ridiculously tall in a unit. So that's the only thing for me. Almost at a point where I'd be considering getting rid of the rock and somehow keeping this, maybe run it across or run it round the base of the floor or something like that. But Yeah, that's my only concern with the miniature is actually the rock and how that will look in rank and file. Okay, moving on. Right, Battle Standard Bearer. Okay. Royal Heralds are the personal champions of Nehekaran royalty, mighty combatants in life who retain their strength in undeath despite their withered forms. The greatest of these champions often bear banners featuring their personal heraldry of the Master, inspiring the deathly legions that accompany them into battle. Now, I have to say, at first glance, I'm not a fan of this miniature. I don't know if it's the paint scheme that is kind of a bit bright on it or what. Maybe it's the red, I don't know. But at first glance, like, okay, you got the scarab beetles on the staff. You got some sort of flail of blade thingies going on here. But the banner itself, I don't know. Yeah. This doesn't do it for me. I don't know. It's a personal thing, guys, right? You know, whether you like or hate miniatures is always a personal thing. And I say, maybe it's the paint job. Maybe I need to see it in the flesh. But right now, you know, I can see what they've gone for. They've got the Kopesh here with the crossed hands and everything else. But I don't know. At the moment, I'm not feeling this as a very Tomb King-y battle standard. It kind of almost feels a bit thrown together. You kind of got this star thing going on the back. Let's throw some Kopeshes on there. Let's have some hieroglyphs on there. Some skulls, of course. Some scarabs running around the place. At the moment, I'm not sold on this miniature. I actually prefer the previous one. I prefer Neckalf. I just don't like his rock. So, yeah. Okay, At the moment, maybe I need to see it in the flesh. Maybe I need to see it in a different paint scheme. But at the moment, not doing it for me. Right, Tomb Swarms. So, I mean, Tomb Swarms remains to be seen if they'll be good in the game. Swarms in the 8th edition weren't exactly the best pick in most cases. So hopefully those will have better rules. But at first glance, I actually really like these. They've got height. Swarms always lacked a bit of height. These swarms, they've got height. They've got dynamism. It's not just a bunch of bugs. You've got the whole thing of sort of these bodies. You've got skulls. You've got weapons in there. It actually feels more like it's a swarm carrying all this detritus and stuff and kind of putting it together as well. So in terms of look, these things I think look great. So the Leash Priests of the Mortuary Cults are well versed in the dark arts of necromancy, and they bolster the armies of their masters with writhing tomb swarms. Comprised of the reanimated corpses of scorpions, scarabs, and all other critters that infest the necropolises of Khemri, these shifting, swirling masses can overpower well-trained combatants with a storm of bites and stings. Cool. On top of all of these, a full range of classic Khemri miniatures will be returning to bolster the forces featured in this article, with much more to come in the future. And if you want to know what that's likely to be, then please check out my Tomb King's faction focus videos, where you can see all the things that were in the previous Tomb King book. So you can get to these things like Necropolis Knights, Sepulchral Stalkers, War Sphinxes, Necrosphinxes, all that type of stuff, which I'd expect to be seeing back. Tomb Guard. And if you're going to have a look at that faction focus, is where we talk about how units used to play in the army book and how they then might play in Warhammer The Old World. Okay, so what else have we got here? The Bretonnians and Tomb Kings are just the first 2 of 9 factions arriving in the world of legend. The rules for the other 7 will be made available at launch in the Fantasy and Ravening Hordes books. Look out for miniature releases for the other 7 in due course. So that's, throughout the year, next year, and so on. Right, okay, so don't worry if you're more of a follower of Hashut, so Chaos Dwarfs, or Interpreter of the Great Plan, Lizard Men. Legacy Army List PDFs, so they will be free for the other 7 factions from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, will be available shortly after launch. Okay, so that's good. So they're not going to be there on day one, that's fine. But, if you're Dark Elves, Lizard Men, any of those, Vampire Counts, Skaven, all of that good stuff, you're actually going to get your army list for free. So actually, if you just want to play Vampire Counts, buy the main rulebook at £42 and then use your PDF, which is going to be free. So that's actually not bad. The downside is knowing you're getting no new miniatures. But if you look at my faction focus videos, actually Lizard Men vampire counts. They've actually got lots of miniatures currently available in Age of Sigmar, and Dark Elves are not far behind. So you've got plenty of options for miniatures on those, and some reimagined ones as well. So that's not a problem. But they're not going to get updated rules as far as we know at this time, so they could become uncompetitive pretty quickly. Right, so all that's left now is to reveal the pre-order date for this Avalanche in the World of Legend. We've got a suspicion it might be quite soon. Keep an eye on Warhammer Community to find out when. So it might be quite soon. So that suggests it could be a January or February, maybe a January pre-order, February release, something like that. But we'll see. So overall, what do I think about the article? Well, it's definitely a bigger article than I was expecting for Boxing Day, I have to say. I thought it was going to be more of a tease. So props to the Warhammer for that, for actually giving us good, solid news. I think that's really important to keep the community on board. So props for that. The core boxes, as I say, I'm not going to talk about them now. I'm going to delve into more of them. I'm going to do a video on each of the core boxes where we take a look at the units and so on. And then I'll give you my thoughts on what I think about the box, the points values and everything else. So I'm not going to delve into that, but nice to see what the boxes are. And look, overall, I actually prefer having a single faction starter box than a dual faction. How many people have bought the Warhammer 40k dual faction starter box and then tried to sell half of it because they only wanted the Marines or they only wanted the Tyranids? So I like this. I think this is an excellent idea and an excellent way of getting people into the game. Hopefully it will be reasonably priced. The main rulebook, happy with that, as expected. And as I said, if we look at the Horus Heresy, £42.50, probably going to be in and around that bracket. Totally expected. This is traditional Games Workshop style. Not what I would like. I would actually like a smaller, cheaper rulebook to get people on board before a big outlay, but it is what it is. These indexes expected some kind of index because it's a release of the game. It's the way you get all faction rules out, so they're playable from day one. That I expected some kind of indexes, and again, if we look at the size, the hardback, and we look at Horus Heresy, it's in that £40 to £42.50 region, right? So that's what we can expect there. The surprise to me was the Arcane Journal. I was expecting more of a traditional army book style, and a kind of less than happy that if I want to use Nekaf, who we've seen down below, or we want to use Cetra in a normal army, then I'm going to have to be referring to two books, this one and this one. If I want to use certain magic items and spells, you're going to have to be referring to two different books. I never like that. I prefer to have everything in one place. And while it's not mandatory, it is if you want to be competitive because you need access to all the rules. So that's my take on it. That's my take. So that's my disappointed thing. And yeah, the miniatures, love the swarms. Battle Standard Bear I'm not a fan of. I like Nekaf, but don't like his rock. I think he's going to look weird in a big rank and file unit of skeletons just because he's going to be so bloody tall. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is my quick hot take on the latest article from Warhammer The Old World, where we from the 26th of December. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, hit the subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do. It means a huge amount for me, so thank you for that in advance. We've got 2 more videos coming up, which is I'm going to delve into each of the starter boxes where we have a look at what's in there, the models, see if we can get a bit more closer up on them from previous, because we know they're old kits. So we'll delve into those. And I've also got a Warriors of Chaos faction focus, which is nearly finished. They do take a lot of work. It has been Christmas time with the family and everything else, but you should see a Warriors of Chaos faction focus on its way out, and that will then be followed by Orcs and Goblins and finishing off with the Wood Elves. Hopefully we can get all of that done before Warhammer The Old World releases, when we're going to be into a whole bunch of stuff looking at the release itself. So there we go. Plenty more to come. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. Tune back in for some more of our Warhammer The Old World content.